All right, folks, I think some of you are still eating, but I think we're going to go ahead with our presentation. It's not too long, but my name's Simon Gutierrez. I'm on the communications team with Pacific Power, and I wanted to welcome you tonight to our customer forum, where we're going to be talking about the ins and outs of our wildfire mitigation plan, some of the efforts that we take to protect the community that we serve, in this case, the Bend community. Wildfire mitigation is one of the company's top priorities, and we've spent over $500 million on that over the past 5 years and are committed to spending more over the next several years as well. So tonight, we're going to be sharing some of the elements of our plan. We've got some guest speakers here, and we'll be providing a bit of a PowerPoint presentation to kind of go over the high-level details of wildfire mitigation, the things that we're doing on the ground to protect you all. We've got Chester Lampkin here. He's one of our meteorologists, and he provides forecasts, daily forecasts on fire conditions and weather conditions that help keep us informed about the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis operationally. Next to him over here, we have Nora Yatsov. She's our Director of Emergency Management. And she'll go over some of the things that you can do to be prepared in the event of a wildfire or any other kind of a disaster type situation, some of the things that you can do to protect the space around your home, and some of the things that the company is doing to help out some of our customers in those situations. And Megan Buckner on the end here, she's the, our Director of Wildfire Mitigation Program Delivery, and she's going to give you like a bit of a tour through the engineering side of things and some of the things that we're doing with our equipment in terms of settings and procedures and processes that we do to make sure that we're minimizing the risk of igniting a wildfire. So we're gonna go through the presentation, but first we have a little video that we're gonna tee up to kind of give you a high-level overview of some of the things that we're doing in some real common sense language about wildfire mitigation. Let's take a look at that now.
We are living in a world where there is more extreme weather, and wildfire risk continues to escalate. Here at PacifiCorp, we are making the investments necessary to protect the public and to protect the infrastructure and to protect the people of this company as well.
While the wildfire risk has been increasing here in the West, the investments that PacifiCorp has made has risen right along with it. To date, we've already spent over $500 million in wildfire mitigation, and the current forecast for deploying the system hardening that's involved in the wildfire mitigation plan reaches into the billions over the next 8-10 years. It becomes important to understand, well, where do we prioritize those investments? And so we want to make sure we're targeting that large investment where it's going to make the most impact, where it's going to reduce that fire risk the most.
We have an expansive weather station network here at PacifiCorp. By the end of 2023, in Pacific Power, we had nearly 300 weather stations, and in Rocky Mountain Power, we had nearly 200 weather stations. They're there because we're collecting important meteorological data that we're going to feed into our local weather forecast models. Temperature, wind, moisture levels, wind gusts. These hundreds of weather stations give us better data so that we can make better decisions on how to mitigate fire risk and how to protect the system from extreme weather events.
So by establishing an internal meteorology team, they're able to run these risk models with our own weather station network to help identify that risk no matter where and no matter when across our entire service territory throughout the year.
We have amazing, really cutting-edge technology. We have a computer model that covers more than 1 million square miles. It forecasts weather for every single point across that entire region. We have access to 2 types of modeling. We have the short-term modeling and the long-term modeling.
With both that long-term and short-term view, we're able to identify where the fire risk is, and by identifying that, we can then decide what mitigations to deploy.
We've taken 30 years of historical data, and we use that to identify areas of potential risk so that we can mitigate as much as we can ahead of potential wildfires in the future.
By looking back at that data, we understand that when the conditions are at their driest and when the wind is at its windiest, that top 5%, when those 2 things come together, that's where 98% of the catastrophic fires have occurred. When those conditions are present, we want to, for safety reasons, de-energize the lines and let those conditions pass. And so we deploy that when we know that the conditions are escalating, but they're nowhere near that top 5%. And so we give ourselves a little bit of a safety buffer, say a 15% dryness, 15% windiness, to make sure that we're making a good balanced decision between the risk and the outages that are created through the mitigation steps of de-energizing.
I'm optimistic because I know that we are doing the work necessary to keep the public safe and to protect the infrastructure of the utility.
As that risk has increased, our response has increased as well to match it and do everything possible to reduce that risk of fire in the areas we serve.
All right, so that gives you kind of a broad overview. Again, we're going to have some speakers to kind of dive a little deeper into the details of what you just saw. I think you probably recognize Chester in the video. He's sitting here next to me. Wanted to let you all know also we're going to have a Q&A session at the end where if you have questions, we'll make sure we can do our best to answer them. If we don't have an answer for you, we'll take down some notes and we'll make sure to get back to you with an answer promptly. Chester, why don't you start things off with a little bit on situational awareness?
All right, thanks a lot, Simon. How's everyone doing tonight? Good, yeah, hopefully the food is good, and it's a beautiful day here in Bend. Love coming out here. I was just out here with my family a couple months ago, and just, it's such an incredible place. Again, my name is Chester. I'm a meteorologist here for Pacific Power. I'm actually pretty new to the utility world. I came from television before I came to this job. So I actually worked in TV media, and I did all sorts of other media type stuff for the last 19 years before I came into the utility world. So the reason why I want you to know that is because, like you, I was just a utility customer. I was on the other side of this podium just 10, 11 months ago. I didn't know anything about all the stuff that we're doing. So we're doing some incredible work here at Pacific Power. I'm pretty proud to be part of the meteorology team. So what's my top job as a meteorologist? Simon kind of alluded to it. We're talking about and looking at the short-term risks to our system and how we can protect our how we can protect the system, protect the communities, protect the people who work for the company. So how do we do that, right? We keep the community safe. First off, we're one of those first utilities in the West and really across the United States that's investing in advanced weather forecasting technology. You saw a little bit about that in the video that we just ran before. We'll talk more a little bit about that here going forward over the next few minutes. But it all starts with situational awareness, like knowing what is happening right now with the weather, with the fuels, the available fuels, how much moisture is out there, or the lack of moisture, what's the snowpack, how much rain have we gotten. It's all about that situational awareness, knowing what is happening right now. We do that by collecting and analyzing weather data in real time, and we use that to predict conditions that would lead to wildfires or extreme fire behavior. So how does that work? We take different kinds of action to reduce the risk. You'll hear a little bit more about that from Megan and Nora. They're going to talk more about what we do in the engineering side and in the preparation side and some of the extreme measures that have to be taken in order to protect the community. But I'm talking about how we can reduce the risk by looking at the weather forecast and knowing what the current conditions are. So again, situational awareness, we're going to talk about that, what's happening now, today, and then we're also going to talk about what's coming soon, that short-term fire risk, that short-term weather forecast that could lead to wildfires and extreme fire behavior. And when I say extreme fire behavior, I mean fires that can quickly get out of control, that can't be battled by firefighting methods. So we go to the daily risk forecasting, this slide here. We're talking about the weather now, today, everywhere that we provide power, so along our entire distribution and transmission lines. We're a team of 5, soon to be 6. There's 3 of us based in Portland, that's where I'm based, and then we have 2 based in Salt Lake City with our sister company, Rocky Mountain Power. But we all work together. We're not just people here, people there, looking at one side of the company to the other. I'm looking at weather in Utah, they're looking at weather in Oregon. We all work together as a team. So there are 5 meteorologists watching the weather all over Pacific Power. Every day there's 1 meteorologist who's generally covering the duty for 3 states on the West Coast. That's Washington, Oregon, and California, and our other 3 states in Rocky Mountain Power. We make a forecast that goes out 5 days into the future. And we use that to support operations so they know how to operate the system. Now, in the winter time, that means winter storms. We're worried about snow, ice, extreme wind. But this time of year, we are keenly keeping an eye on the wildfire risk. We've been preparing for this fire season since last fire season. We've been working on that all winter long. So that's our main concern, the high winds, the dry weather, unusually hot, dry weather. Days like this where it gets a little windy, you get a little concerned about fire behavior and how it works. How do we watch the weather? We do it with these weather stations. You may see some of those on some of our poles. Those are weather stations we installed ourselves, that network of 454 weather stations that provide that 24/7 monitoring of the weather. We also use weather stations from other companies, other organizations, so we don't just use our weather stations, which are on our distribution and transmission lines, but we look at the weather stations that come from the Forest Service, the National Weather Service, whatever source we got. If it's an accurate weather station and it's in and around our service territory where we provide power to your house, we're looking at a weather station in your neighborhood. So we know what's going on with the weather. Every weather station is tied to a circuit, right? Those distribution lines that connect power to your home, and therefore we have a weather station connected to every single one of those. So we have a weather station associated with everybody who is a Pacific Power customer. So that's how you know we're keeping an eye on things happening in your neighborhood. All right, so here is, there it is, our lovely map. I love mapping. We're map nerds, we're geography nerds in meteorology, and we love looking at maps. And this is the map of the Bend area, and you can see our weather station network that we have throughout the Bend area. So we've got weather stations throughout the area. We also take advantage of weather stations from other companies, other organizations. What's great about our weather stations, though, are specifically our weather stations, which you could pull up on that website, pacificpowerweather.com, is that our weather stations, a lot of them can provide 10-minute data and really even up to 30-second weather data if we really wanted to. We can flip a switch. So we get the latest weather forecast, the latest weather data that contributes to our forecast minute by minute. So our data comes in every 10 minutes on a regular day. We get temperature, humidity, wind, all the stuff you'd see on a television weather report, right? All the normal stuff you associate with weather. But we also look at other type of data as well. We look at the live and dead moisture, the live and dead fuel moisture in vegetation. And you're probably wondering, well, why are we worried about the fuel moisture in dead vegetation? Because live vegetation makes sense. If it's alive, it's not as likely to burn. It's green. It's harder to burn those sorts of things. But dead vegetation moisture, the dead fuel moisture, has a major impact on fires, incredible impact. Because sometimes you can have live fuel moisture and dead fuel moisture in the same spot, and you could still get a fire to burn. Or think about our area of forests. There's a lot of stuff on the ground, that litter, that duff, that stuff that has fallen and is on the ground, and it's dead, right? And you're thinking, well, why would it have moisture? Well, it's got moisture from all the rain and snow we got all winter long. So that delays our fire season when we have bigger snowpacks or more rain in the spring system. So it has a major impact on what we're doing, and it's a major impact on fire behavior. So we're looking at all of that in meteorology. We're not just looking at temperature and wind and humidity. We're looking at all these factors that can contribute to wildfires. And that's how we keep you safe. All right, so again, you can get that data from that website, pacificpowerweather.com. We may mention it one or two more times. We highly recommend you check it out. You can actually just see a weather station near your neighborhood. You can find it on the map, and you can see weather stations in your area, and you can even use it for your own weather needs, if you will. And we'll talk about the data that's also available there in a moment. We don't work in a vacuum. It's not just us 5 meteorologists working, and we're only us talking to each other. We're on weekly calls and sometimes daily calls during fire season with the Area National Weather Service offices, with the National Interagency Fire Center, or NIFC. They have forecasters that produce weather forecasts that are related specifically to fire weather. And in fact, we took one of their meteorologists and hired them onto our team. So thank you very much, NIFC. We appreciate that. We were the Forest Service, other NOAA entities, all sorts of local entities, national, state, federal, everything. We work with other companies, other utilities, in order to figure out best ways to mitigate wildfire risk in the weather world. Let's talk about the short-term modeling. This is incredibly important. You know, the situational awareness, knowing what the weather's doing right now, that's important. But of course, there's that 5-day forecast, and that's that looking forward, that short-term risk, that next 5 to 10 days, if you will. As far as the long-term risk stuff, we'll talk more about that again. Megan's going to have a lot more about that in our wildfire mitigation program. But in the weather, we're concerned about the weather conditions and the fire conditions over the next 5 to 10 days. We make that 5-day forecast, we report it to operations, we look at the short-term fire risk, and we use weather risk modeling. We have our own in-house computer that we run. It costs millions of dollars. It's very expensive, so we protect it very much. We keep that data in-house. We use that data to predict weather everywhere we provide power. It's all linked to our lines on the system. We also use that to feed a wildfire model that can simulate how wildfires would behave if they were to start. In fact, that model, it actually simulates wildfires every single day. It simulates a fire everywhere along our lines. I think it's every 10 miles or so along our lines. And we run that every single day. So then it gives us a score and say, these are the areas with the highest risk of wildfire. And then we tell operations, this is where we're concerned about this or that. And then we operate the system safer, keeping our community safer. We also use historical data. We look backwards. We actually ran the WRF model, that Weather Research Forecast model. That's what WRF stands for, the in-house model. We ran it backwards 30 years. So we're using the data that we learned from those past 30 years and looking at the data looking forward to see what are the most extreme days. We look back at that 30-year data set and say, on these days, we had extreme fire weather indicators, and then we cross-reference that with actual fires and say, this fire was started on this extreme fire day. So that's how we're using this advanced modeling. We also use forecaster expertise. We're not just using modeling and computers. We have forecasters who have expertise in different areas, like our fire behavior, like our fire meteorologists who came from NIFC. So we all have our areas of expertise, and we're always learning and trying to find better ways to make accurate forecasts. So again, our computer modeling, it can compare forecasts every single day, looking back in the past 3 decades to what's coming up in the next 5 days. And it predicts how extreme those conditions can be, impacts and risks to the power lines, power outages, and wildfire ignition, and how fire would behave as well. So that's incredibly cutting edge stuff. It's really cool stuff that I would have never known. Like when I worked in television, I just made my weather forecast. And I was like, here's your weather, sunny, cloudy, storms, etc. And now it's like, sometimes I don't even know what the temperature is. My wife will like, what's the temperature today? I don't know. All I know is that there's no fire risk. That's all I know. Okay, so let's show you some of the stuff that we're doing, right? This is our in-house computer model. We'll run the video. And this is our in-house WRF. I've taken you back to August 2023, and this is the wind gusts from a few days leading up to the Smith River Complex fire, which some of you all may have heard about this. This was the biggest fire of 2023 in Northern California. Some of it did creep into Southern Oregon, and it impacted our transmission and distribution lines in Northern California. This is the wind forecast that day. Not a ton of wind, actually, the day that fire ignited. It wasn't a wind-caused fire. It wasn't a human-caused fire, though that is certainly a risk, something we can't model. But we can model things like lightning. This is the lightning parameter from our computer model, our WRF model, and it shows you lightning in Northern California here, and then there's Southern Oregon. So at the very top of the map is Ashland, and then just north of that would be Medford to get your bearings. Klamath Falls is over here. This is lightning that led up to that Smith River complex. It was actually several fires that ignited in the Smith River Valley in that area there northeast of Crescent City. Fire was started by lightning. And this is the fire. We simulated that fire. We were actually in operation. We were activated in our emergency mode there, and we were simulating the fire, the Smith River Complex fire, as it approached this purple line. What's that purple line? That's our transmission, and it feeds Crescent City. And we had to simulate when that fire was going to run into our transmission lines and how it was going to impact us and the folks who are working out there, and how we run the system, how we operate the system. So it had direct impacts on Pacific Power customers. So we had to make changes to how we operated the system. We had to shut off the power to Crescent City because of this fire. And it wasn't, last year was a pretty benign fire season in California, and we had major impacts from that. And that's where the world is moving to, right? We're seeing that risk grow and grow. First in California, now we're seeing that risk grow farther north into Oregon and Washington and across the West. We've even seen it in other parts of the country. Texas, Louisiana had banner fires last year. This is a risk that the community, everybody is dealing with. It's not just utilities. We're at the forefront of this. That's why we've implemented this technology. This is a Wildfire Enterprise Analyst. Again, this is this particular parameter on that Wildfire Enterprise Analyst. It actually is showing you the area where fire is most likely to ignite. This is called ERC, Energy Release Component. Just know where it's orange, that's where fire was most likely to ignite on the days of this Smith River complex. And you can see this area, Northern California, Southern Oregon, that's where we are pinging some of the worst fire risk, stretching up into Northern Oregon. There were other areas. There was a fire outside of Portland that ignited. There was fires west of here that was outside of our service territory that ignited during that time. And then I want to finish here, as my time is running up, I want to finish here with the PacificPowerWeather.com. I told you I'd bring it up again. You can get information on our weather forecast there. You can actually see our weather data. It's raw weather data, so it's open to interpretation, but the data that's live here, this is stuff that is on our weather stations throughout our service territory. Wind, temperature, humidity, etc. We show you what the top wind gusts are, and noteworthy gust is when we see the worst gust. When it starts to ping, we use this website in-house to forecast the weather. When it starts to ping with certain wind speeds, it'll show us orange and red to tell us that's a top 95th percentile wind or a top 99th percentile wind, meaning only 1% of days sees wind that strong. Meaning 2, 3, maybe 4 days a year, winds are that strong. And that's when we see the biggest impacts to our system and the worst wildfire behavior. You can check this out, PacificPowerWeather.com. You can also see some of our raw weather data, including our in-house computer models. It's the only place you can get it, publicly available. And you can find a weather station near your house. You can click on it, and it shows you a little pretty little graph, and it shows you humidity and temperature and what the wind forecast is going to be. It's pretty neat stuff. Actually, there it is. There's an example of it at the top. That's our WRF model right there. So that's what I have to show you today. Hopefully, you'll learn a little bit about what we do in the short term. Again, I'm going to toss it over to Megan. She's going to talk about how we harden the system and we prepare for that long-term risk, the things that we're doing to mitigate the risk and to keep the community safe. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Chester. Well, I'm so glad to be back here in Bend. The drive up here was beautiful. I guess I've only been up here in the winter for ski season, but the summers, oh man, I got to come up here more often. It's really nice. So my name is Megan Buckner. I am the Director of Wildfire Mitigation Program Delivery at Pacific Power. And that's a relatively long title. It sounds complicated, but what I'm going to be talking about today is very simple. It is the programs or the tools in the toolbox that Pacific Power has available to it to mitigate wildfire risk depending on the situation and the risk that there is. So Chester described how his team is simulating wildfires and monitoring the system. And so what I'll be speaking to is, what are we doing about that? So you're watching the system, that's great. What are you doing? And those are the programs or the tools that I'll be talking about more in detail. Today I'll be speaking to the programs that the utility has, so us as Pacific Power have. But like what Chester said, wildfire is a community problem. So I encourage everyone in the audience to please reach out to your public safety partners, your emergency managers, your fire departments, and learn more about some of the other wildfire programs that are occurring in your community. Now, to talk about what the utility is doing, what Pacific Power is doing in terms of programs, there are generally two groupings. The first grouping is what I would call grid hardening, system resilience. It's making the equipment harder or more resistant to contact by object, limbs falling on it, risks, things like that. The second grouping of tools or programs is going to be the operational practices and the system operations. What can be done differently? How can we work differently to mitigate wildfire risk? And before I tell you too much more about the programs, I do want to note that the Pacific Power Wildfire Mitigation Plan is available online. You can read it. And it has been recognized in a Stanford study as one of the best in the country. Now, talking a little bit more about the actual programs, when we talk about grid resiliency or grid hardening, those programs can be quite expensive, and so they are targeted at what we call our fire high consequence area. The fire high consequence area is represented here in purple. It's generally your southern Oregon area. There's some spots up in Hood River as well. And that's where we're targeting some of the system hardening, like line rebuild, that I'll talk about in just a minute. However, there are more programs that are system-wide, including in your area, that I'll also be speaking to. First, a little bit about the system hardening work. It can take the form of two different styles, if you will. First, the line would be scoped for line rebuild, and it can look like covered conductor or undergrounding. Covered conductor is a replacement of bare conductor with a more insulated covered wire. There's an example over here on the right on the display on top, so if you guys have some time at the end of this meeting, feel free to take a look at it. Now, when you go in and you replace the bare conductor with covered conductor, there are some additional pieces of equipment that can also go with it, such as aerial spacers. It prevents your wires from hitting each other, or your wire-to-wire contact type of risk. There's also fire-resistant poles that are installed. As you can imagine, replacing with covered conductor can be quite heavy. And so as the engineers are designing the line rebuild, there's things considered like replacing your poles with more resilient material, such as fiberglass or steel poles. Next, there is the possibility of, instead of covered conductor, going to underground. This is evaluated on a project-by-project basis, depending on the environment, permitting costs, all of these sorts of factors are considered. Now, these are some of the programs that are being prioritized in the FHCA, the fire high consequence area that I spoke to. However, I do want to note that there are other programs that are system-wide, including the replacement of reclosers and relays with what I like to call these smart reclosers or relays. They operate quicker. If you've ever been sitting at home and you felt your lights flicker and then flicker again and then all of a sudden it shut off, that would be a recloser operating. It's switching very quickly to mitigate the risk associated with a down power line, if you will, or something contacting the line. Now, those are the system hardening programs. That's how we're replacing equipment on the line. That's how we're making the system more resilient itself. But there are other things that can be done, such as operating or working differently. One example is the vegetation management program that occurs across all of the service territory. And within the FHCA, there is an additional sort of clearance and work that's done. However, across the service territory, there's air and ground surveillance for vegetation management. There's also vegetation and tree pruning that occurs. Within the FHCA, your clearances will be wider, they may be more frequent. However, this type of work does occur system-wide. There's also the tree removal program, where dead, diseased, dying trees are identified for removal. You can think of these as when someone goes and inspects the line, they see a tree and it doesn't look like it's doing so well. So it's been identified for removal before it dies and falls on a line, right? So we're trying to prevent that sort of line down situation. Another program that's not mentioned here on the slide but is worth noting is the pole clearing program, where poles which have equipment on it, select equipment on it, are identified for clearing all of the vegetation at the bottom. You can think of this as if equipment were to drop a spark on the ground, there wouldn't be any vegetation for it to fall onto. And that's what the pole clearing program seeks to achieve. So those are some of the vegetation management programs that occur. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about asset management and some of the field operations work. Asset management in the FHCA area does occur more frequently, and it does have the conditions corrected quicker. You can think of it as finding things quicker and fixing them quicker, right? Additionally, there is the Transmission Infrared Inspection Program, which seeks to find hotspots across the system. So this is where a thermographer, a pilot, and a lineman will fly across every transmission line in the state, identifying hotspots. Hotspots can be due to things like arcing or potential, equipment malfunction, something like that. There's a lot of things that can lead to a hotspot on a line. And identifying them early is sort of an early indication of some sort of repair being needed. And so these items are corrected as well. Additionally, the field operations teams can work differently. So during elevated fire situations, so for example, if the meteorology report is indicating there's an elevated risk today, field operations can operate differently. They can not drive off-road, so trucks, vehicles, things like that can be a source of ignition. So we want to stay on the roads instead of driving off where there's fuel or vegetation. Additionally, water trucks can be taken to work sites, and so water trucks can water down the ground before working. Another alternative is deferral of work, right? So if the risk is high, if it's very windy, if it's very dry, those sorts of situations are occurring, work can be deferred to another time when the wildfire risk is lower. And these are the sort of field operation practices, sort of things, boots on the ground are different. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about system operations, how we can operate the system a little bit differently. And I have actually a pretty great video here that describes the last set of tools in the toolbox, or operating the system differently. It's a tiered approach based off of the type of risk that's available, the type of risk that there is happening, or that the situational awareness reports indicate. You know, there's this sort of, okay, there's low windy risk, okay, it's very windy risk. And then there's also this situation where, okay, there's a wildfire encroaching on our line. How do we operate the system now? And this video is going to go into a little more depth on that.
At Pacific Power, we're committed to providing the safe, reliable service you count on every day. During conditions such as gusting winds and hot, dry weather, and in areas near trees and other types of vegetation that could ignite, we may need to take certain steps to reduce the potential risk and impact of wildfires. While these safety measures may interrupt your service, they are essential to preventing catastrophic wildfire events. Let's look at 3 of the ways we help protect communities during times of heightened wildfire risk. The first is enhanced safety settings. During times when wildfire risk is elevated, we will adjust the sensitivity of some of our equipment. With these settings activated, our lines will de-energize quicker, within fractions of a second, if a line is contacted by a tree branch or other debris, reducing the risk of a fire ignition. Because of this, there's an increased potential for power to be disrupted and remain off until field crews can visually inspect the lines to determine if power can be safely restored. Next up is the public safety power shutoff. Hotter, drier, and windier weather conditions can create heightened wildfire risk, and we may implement a public safety power shutoff, or PSPS, temporarily shutting off power to specific targeted areas. A PSPS is done in partnership with local emergency management teams, using available communication options to notify customers that power may be turned off, and to keep affected communities informed throughout an enacted shutoff. Once we've determined that the fire risk has passed, we will re-energize lines and restore service. Finally, our wildfire encroachment strategy is another wildfire safety tool that may result in a disruption of your power. When an active wildfire moves close enough to threaten burning into the area of our lines or equipment, we will begin monitoring the fire closely to evaluate its potential spread and impacts to our systems. If the fire is moving too close to our assets, we will do an emergency de-energization of our power lines. This process helps us make the most effective decisions to avoid additional fire risk and protect first responders. Here at Pacific Power, we're dedicated to keeping our customers safe while delivering the power that our communities count on each and every day. And during times of extreme weather events, when wildfire risk is at its highest, our wildfire safety strategies will help protect our customers and the communities that we serve. To learn more, visit us at pacificpower.net/wildfire.
So I think the key thing is keeping our customers safe is really what the priority of the company is. And so these are some of the operating protocols that can happen in response to the risk situation that's occurring. I do also want to mention in that video, there was a nice little light branch that fell on a line, and the lineman came along and was able to just lift it off. I think you guys know from your smiles that sometimes it can be a whole tree, and it can take some time. So if you're experiencing line or outages, please understand, we would like to turn the power on. We want to clear the line, we want to do it safely, and sometimes it just takes time. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nora to speak more to the emergency practices, and she'll be also speaking to things that the community can do to be more prepared, and also how to prepare your space for the upcoming fire season. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Can everybody hear me okay? I have a fairly quiet voice. Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. Thank you very much for coming out here tonight and caring about what we do and how we can make sure that we communicate our practices to you and help you understand, and also caring about wildfire safety and your community and your homes. You heard Chester talk about our situational awareness and how they forecast potentially dangerous weather, and that to me is actionable intelligence, and that really feeds into how we operate. Megan talked about the long-term impacts and how we can long-term mitigate our risk and make our infrastructure harder, so that way we don't have to potentially do these practices, in the future. But until then, we have this gap, and we need to make sure that we address the gap as best as we can. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what to expect. I'm going to focus specifically on public safety power shutoffs. You've heard about them, I'm sure by now, PSPS events. We're going to talk a little bit about what it takes to do a PSPS event. We've had the program around for about 5 years. And as you may remember in the initial video, there was a graph with a green, a yellow, and then this tiny little red in the upper right corner. Those are the conditions that we consider PSPS events. So it's very rare, but those are extreme weather conditions that we would consider conducting these events. So what are those conditions? You heard a little bit about the vegetation, dry and live vegetation moisture. So you've got a lot of dry, dead vegetation that can take off. That's a consideration. Your terrain, is it a flat grassland where it's windy and it just moves really quickly? You've probably seen the fires in Northern California outside of Livermore recently. That's a very early fire season fire, and that was moving very rapidly. Or you have very dense vegetation with steep terrain. Fires love that. They move very quickly with that too. So we consider that condition. And then finally, does it have an impact on people, on infrastructure, on homes, on communities? When all three of those come together and we have those extreme conditions, that's when we consider a PSPS event. I will talk through what you can expect from us as far as communication goes. But just to note also, in the 5 years that we've had this as a program, we've only done one PSPS in Oregon, and that was September of 2022. Did not do it in this community, but it was along the I-5 corridor and along the coastal areas. So fairly rare. We don't know with climate change, the increase and the potential for that, but we're always on the lookout. So here's the timeline of how we would communicate with the PSPS. And it may be a little small in the back, but I'll go ahead and talk through it. This is what you would expect from us. So as you heard from Chester, they create the weather forecast. And see how windy it is? They create the weather forecast 5 days in advance, which lets us know that potentially we have these extreme conditions. With that, we take a few days to fine-tune that and really narrow down where that location is. And you saw that in Megan's video on the PSPS, where we just zone into the neighborhoods that potentially could be impacted. We don't do widespread if we don't need to. We try to limit the impact to customers as best as we can. 3 days before the PSPS event, it's still forecasted on track, we start contacting our public safety partners. That would be the emergency manager, that would be the fire department, that would be any hospitals. And we do a couple of things in that day, the third day, is we look at, are there any critical infrastructure that may need power during the power outage? So is there a hospital or a care facility that may need power, and we work to assist them with that. Also, do we need to stand up a community resource center? A community resource center, unlike a shelter, is open during day hours, typically 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And it's a place to go to get away from the heat, the wind, get into air conditioning, get Wi-Fi to charge to get online, get charging for your devices, whether it's a phone or medical device, get information about the event, get some snacks, some water, coffee. So we determine what will work for the community to set that up, and if we need to set one up. We can set it up anywhere. We have a tent, that's a self-contained tent, a large one that can be set up, or we can set it up at a facility, like a school or a church or another type of facility. So we determine that. And now we're looking at the green area here, 24 to 48 hours. That's when we start contacting our customers. That's when we let them know that this is potential to happen in your area. This is potentially going to impact your home. We contact you directly with the information that you have provided. We do this again at the 48 and the 24-hour mark, so 2 days before, 1 day before. And then as we're getting closer and the weather's being fine-tuned even more, we'll let you know 1 to 4 hours in advance. That gives you time to prepare and think about, do you need to get some extra items? Do you need to go somewhere else? And you know, is there a situation with your neighbors or your family that you need to take care of? And then we give you that final warning and let you know that the weather does look like it's getting worse, and it does look like we have to shut the power off. Now, there have been times that we don't have to and the weather doesn't materialize. We'll let you know at that point as well. We do a final one to let you know we're starting to de-energize, and then we go through the event. You've had, you know, at this point, four notifications. During the event, we'll operate those CRCs that we talked about, the community resource centers, and provide services, as well as working with our public safety partners to make sure the needs are met for those critical facilities. When the power is ready to start turning back on, we get meteorology says, look, the winds have died down, we're clear. We work with our experts, and we start restoring the power. It's important to note this may take some time depending on how far out you are and how rural you are. The reason is we have to patrol and inspect the lines, as you saw in the video that Megan mentioned. You know, it's not usually just a little tree limb, it's usually a lot more than that. We can only do this during the daytime. We can't, in daylight hours, we can't do this at night without visibility. And, you know, that may delay it. We step restore, which means we restore a section, then we move on to the next section and the next section. So we try to gather as much of the customer base as we can when we do that. When the PSPS is done, we make one final call and let you know we have restored your power. We do this for 2 reasons. We do it because if you don't have your power back on, then we ask you to call us so we can troubleshoot why your power's not back on. And the second, if you've had to go somewhere else, that you know it's safe to go home. If you had to, you know, go to a family member, perhaps you have somebody in your family that requires electricity for medical devices, and you're not able to sustain them at home. We do this to let you know that it's now safe to come home. So a lot of communication, and you understand at this point why it's very important for us to have your contact information updated. There's 2 ways that you can do that. You can either call our customer service number and just make sure that you have your preferred phone, your email, and text, if you receive text, updated. But also to make sure that you understand that we communicate with you directly as well as an impacted customer. Now, we typically, when we have an outage or an event like this, we will send a phone, email, and text, and it's an automated phone call. But for customers that are in our medical certificate program, we have customer service make a physical phone call and talk to that customer. We do that to make sure that the customer understands the implications of the potential power outage and that they're prepared. And if they need resources, that we can assist them with getting some resources. The problem with that is, as you can probably imagine, we don't always know which customers have these requirements. And we don't always know that the customers may require an electricity. It's based on disclosure from the customer. So we're asking you today, if you have anybody in your family, anybody in your friends or your neighborhood that you know may require electricity for their devices, please encourage them to register in the program so that way we're aware and we can do that additional outreach to them. You can, if you're savvy, you can scan the QR code here, but we also have brochures available in the back for the medical certificate program, one side in Spanish and one in English. And then I'd also like to share that we're offering a medical backup power rebate. This is up to $4,000, and it allows customers on the medical certificate program to qualify for a rebate. It can be a variety. There's quite a few options online of qualifying either backup generation, portable batteries, in-home batteries, to fit their needs. There's a variety of sizes, and up to $4,000 is really a great deal for those. So we offer that. We have that available. Is in a brochure in the back as well. So please grab one if you know somebody that may need it. The rebate also is qualified for those that run a care facility, like a long-term care, hospice, adult daycare, other types of facilities that may have these individuals, so that they qualify as well too. So please share that broadly, either QR code or brochure. And then finally, I'm going to ask a couple questions here from you. How many of you in this room have an emergency plan? Okay. That's actually quite normal. It's quite normal, and it's totally okay. I want to encourage you to talk about it. So a plan doesn't cost anything. There's a lot of templates available online. All it takes is a couple of conversations and a couple of minutes of your time. You can do this in phases. You don't have to do it all at once. Talk to your family. Talk to those that rely on you. Find out if you can't get home or if you don't have communication, what's your emergency meeting place? What do you expect of hazards in your area? What do you expect when there's a winter storm? What do you expect when there's a heat wave, a flood? It could be anything. Fortunately, Cascada Subduction Zone is not as big of a thing here as it is on the other side of Oregon, but what will you expect? Do you have everybody's phone number? Do you know everybody's phone number? Now that with our smartphones, I don't remember anybody's actual phone number. So write it down, because there may be a time you may not have your phone and you need to get a hold of somebody. Your prescriptions, your medical insurance, all of that information, it's free to gather. It just takes time. And it really is a great opportunity to actually connect. And that sense of just, having that in place, that sense of, security and resilience goes a long way, I have to tell you. Next thing, how many of you have an emergency kit? Okay, that's better, much better. This is a little bit more cumbersome, of course. It takes a little bit more time. You have to buy contents, you have to store them. You can have a kit at home, you can have a kit, if you're stuck at home for 2 to 3 weeks is the recommendation. That is food that you're gonna eat, not suet or MREs, right? You want good food that's shelf stable, There's those protein bars that taste like, but they'll sustain you. There's 3,000 calories in there, and it's just basically fat and seeds, and they're not tasty. So get something that you guys actually will eat. There's a lot of options. Make sure you have dietary concerns identified. Make sure that if you have kids or pets, they're taken care of as well. Comfort items for kids is so important because they're so scared and they're so worried during a disaster. So just having a couple of comfort items for them is really important. And then, of course, if you have vulnerable loved ones, assistive devices or any medications that they may need, work with your doctor to get an extra emergency prescription and have that in your kit that's available just in case you can't get to a doctor for a while. And then the last question I'm going to ask is, how many of you have defensible space? See? Okay, that's awesome. Super awesome. Okay. Defensible space, for those of you that have land or have the opportunity to have a lot of land, even if it's a smaller yard, is really zoned from close to your home, mid-range and out, and how you can manage your vegetation and make sure that you can help create and secure your home when a wildfire encroaches. And there's information that we have available as well. I also want to note that we have vegetation management with us tonight, and they brought some really great brochures. I have some up here with me. Small trees for small places. This is the type of trees you plant next to power lines. We also have, I'm going to go ahead and move on to that. We also have trees and power lines. They don't go very well together, as you may have noticed. When you're out and about, if you see something like this, please report it. If we can take care of it during a blue sky day, a day like today, that'll help alleviate potential impact when we have a bad weather day. So we encourage you to do that. We also have brochures on that, and brochures on the right tree, the right place. I don't know if you've heard about that. It's energy efficiency, so it's planning for wind barriers, planning for shade, and other types of ways that vegetation can actually help. So I'm going to close it out with that, and we'll start the Q&A in a minute. But really, a couple of asks for you today, because you are here and you do show that you care, is please verify, make sure your information is up to date with us. I don't know how many of you think to do that on a regular basis. I know I don't usually, but you can go online to your account or call customer service. Also, please make sure that we have your neighbors, your family members, anybody that is vulnerable and that requires electricity for any assistive devices, that we have their information, because that way we can make sure we can make direct contact with them in the most important times, and also offer their assistance for a rebate as well, for the battery backup rebate. So again, thank you for your time. Appreciate you coming tonight, and we'll go to the Q&A section here.